travelling through Manchester by train recently, I was joined in the carriage by 6 women in late middle age, obviously refreshed from an afternoon spent in the city's bars. I was surprised to realise that the topic of their conversation was the US President Donald Trump. A couple of them were contemptuous of him, and the others, while not exactly supporting him, did admire the fact that at least he speaks his mind. One of them was especially keen to stress that she did not believe that Trump had told the 4 congresswomen of colour, the squad, to go home. That presumably would have been too racist, but rather simply to leave. As the group departed the carriage, one of them decided to scandalise her friends yet more by remarking that Trump, anyway, is sexy. Manchester is a left-wing, EU-supporting city. Britain's new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, doesn't have a hope in hell of gaining any traction here. On a visit shortly after his appointment, he was booed in the street and even had to ask an audience of hand-picked Tories to applaud him. Less Trump than Jeb Bush. Yet even here, one encounters the standard and contradictory defences of right-wing populist figures. He didn't hear what we all heard him say. He didn't mean it, and besides, agree or not, you have to enjoy the spectacle of him daring to say it. In underestimating this, both Trump and Johnson's liberal and left detractors are failing to grasp the reasons that conventional criticisms don't work on politicians of this kind. It is a common complaint that populist politicians like Trump and Johnson get away with what they do by cynically promising to give the people what they want. But when we use this common phrase, we perhaps forget the extent to which people aren't particularly clear on what it is they want. In our personal lives, we are either haunted by not getting what we want, or, when it does arrive, are frustrated by the fact that it's never quite right, never quite what we imagined. Ask any psychoanalyst, or indeed your next Tinder date. Populists like Trump and Johnson, by contrast, appear to enjoy themselves indiscriminately. They pile up sexual indiscretions, relish politically incorrect language, joyfully march over all constitutional convention, and earn obscene amounts from seeming to do very little at all. They collude to have journalists beaten up or offer to pay the legal fees of supporters who might rough up protesters for them. Trump's unpresidential diet of junk food, his alleged days in front of the television, his sexual comparisons of his own daughter to the porn star Stormy Daniels during their tryst, none of this was disqualifying, because whereas the rest of us are quite puzzled about what it is we want, Trump seems to have no trouble enjoying himself whatsoever. The populism scholar Daphne Halikopoulou has argued that radical right parties and politicians often function by recognising generalised and inarticulate feelings of anger and dissatisfaction and offering their policies as catch-all solutions. These parties do not so much respond to pre-existing desires out there in the electorate, rather they teach the electorate new ones. In the case of Trump and Johnson, we could add that such figures do not simply give the people what they want. It is more that their unstatesmanlike actions are performances of wanting, obtaining, and most importantly, enjoying on the people's behalf. Boris Johnson's opponents in Britain appear to be making the same errors in trying to undermine him as Trump's have in the US. Last summer, Johnson wrote a newspaper column comparing Muslim women who cover their faces with a veil to letterboxes. The result was days of criticism for the racism of the comments, demands for an apology which never arrived, followed by hand-wringing and prevarication about how racist the remarks actually were. Instead of focusing on the racism, it would have been more effective to highlight the cynicism. Anyone could see that the column was designed to provoke controversy of precisely the kind that it ended up receiving, to bolster Johnson's support among right-wingers and his credentials as a candidate who, yes, speaks his mind. Coming weeks after Johnson's rumoured meeting with Steve Bannon, Trump's former advisor and chief of staff, The episode had all the markers of Trump's outrageous comments, such as insulting John McCain, which he also benefited from refusing to apologise for and keeping in the news cycle. Another Liberal approach has been to focus on Johnson's sexual scandals and, a couple of months ago, a violent argument with his much younger current partner. But we know that the release of a recording of Trump describing himself carrying out sexual assaults did nothing to prevent him winning the votes of a majority of white women. As the legal scholar Heidi Matthews has argued, Me Too has been conspicuously weak as a political tool. Allegations against Brett Kavanaugh and Joe Biden have had no effect on their political trajectories whatsoever. And it seems that allegations are only believed by voters when they're made against politicians who they dislike anyway. Populist politicians can and should be criticised for their inconsistencies, lies, corruption, sexism and racist language. But they can't be beaten that way. Johnson's critics must learn from the failures of American liberals and attack Johnson less for his offensiveness than for his fakeness and cynicism. Better, they should appreciate that a politics of offering people enjoyment with impunity, even if only for vicarious consumption, can't be beaten by calls for moderation, sensibleness and being realistic. The new left of Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn is at its best and strongest when it recognises that right-wing populism is better resisted by politicians who are willing to offer new kinds of shared enjoyment and plenty, not merely by begrudging right-wingers theirs.